The welder was giving me a bit of grief in that it wasn't feeding the wire when I pulled the trigger. It seemed that as the spool of wire was getting smaller, the friction drive that pulls the wire through didn't have enough pressure down on the wire to enable it to grip the wire sufficiently to make it spool off the spool. I also decreased the tension on the spool to make it easier for the drive to make it rotate. It took me a few instances of the issue to figure out what the problems were. I could have become frustrated with it, but the reality is that I need to learn how the machine should be set. This is the first spool of wire that I've put through the machine. And so we come to the end of another day. And so the two sides are basically done. I will still need to put some kind of a hinge or catch or whatever. I haven't finally decided yet on the ends here for the front and rear tailgates, but I wanted to bring these in so that they didn't get more rusty than they have already. And so what I'm planning to do now is to clean these up and to get some rust kill on them where they need it, and then to put some galvanized paint over them. So that will need the next bit. We'll see you next time. Bye. Good afternoon. Doing a bit of work around the trailer sides. So I have not actually at this point taken the rust off the frames that I've made and painted them, in part because I needed to get some paint, and secondarily because I've decided I really need to weld the gudgeons on for the tailgate and the front gate before I paint it. And I needed to buy those rather than manufacture them. It was just easier to buy them. So swinging back to the paint, you may remember, I can't really remember whether it was in a video or not, but I did use some of this paint, which is Rust Kill. It's a Wattle product, and this was the silver one. I used it on one of the sides of a shed that I dismantled that had got a bit rusty. But I had noticed previously that it's not that flash a product, so I put the Rust Kill product on to the rusty metal. That's the one that reacts with the rust and goes a browny colour and forms a bit of a crust. And then I used the Wattle product over the top of it. But I have noticed that the rust over time does come back through that product. So I decided I'll go back to good old reliable Cold Galv, which is this product. And this tin weighs a lot. It's basically full of zinc. So mostly zinc in here. It's expensive, and you also have to purchase with it the thinner cum brush cleaner, whatever, because terps and things don't really work. So I have both of those in preparation for doing that, but I want to finish the frames first, and then I'll take them somewhere sunny, because it's really a bit cold down in the workshop here for doing that. It's not going to adhere well. So that's that part of it. I'll show you what I bought yesterday, apart from the Cold Galv, and that is these gudgeons and pins and clips and things. So these are the gudgeons, and they're cheap as chips to buy. I think they're about $4 something each. Now sure, I could have got a piece of steel, mild steel from somewhere and made them myself, but for the hassle that would be involved in making them, it wasn't worth it. So that's 4 for the front and 4 for the rear. The tailgates are going to be different. So the front one, it will basically, it will just drop in onto those pins and sit there on top of the existing tailgate. And so if I need to remove it for any reason, I can just lift it up and take it away. I will put a pin through the gudgeon on both sides at the top one so that it can't, bounce around and come out accidentally kind of thing. But the rear tailgate, I'm going to make a two-piece one hinged on the sides. So there'll be two gudgeons on each side. It'll be hinged, it'll be two pieces. And then these fellas here, I could only get them in stainless. They will go through the bottom of each side and down into the existing tailgate to hold it fore and aft. And then this, if I hold it that way, you can see how it works. This will be at the top, but at the back, not on the top, but on the back of it this way. And that will hold those two gates together. Now, the reason I'm doing that is that if I have the trailer full of soil or compost or some, pea metal, whatever, I want to be able to just open that gate without a hassle, and that will be the best way to do that. It also means that I can leave the gates attached, and they'll be solid gates because they'll have sheet metal on them, but I can swing them around so that they will clip back against the sides, the raised sides of the trailer, and then obviously the existing shorter tailgate will just fold down. With the front tailgate will remain there as well, and which means that if I have long lengths of timber, I can drop that down and slot the timber through underneath the side extension, if you like. And I think that's going to be the best plan. If I have lots of timber, I can just take the front gate out, obviously. That's the plan. To start with, what I need to do is find some material for that. And it's going to be a bit of a cobbled together thing, but I do have some of the material left that I used for the sides. So there's this bit here. In its previous life, this is two pieces and it's got a joining sleeve over the top of it. So I need to take this sleeve off, and I have another piece of this outside that has also got a sleeve on it. I will take them both apart, and then I can join the two bits together with one of the sleeves, and that will give me enough for the front gate extension. With respect to the rear tailgate, I'm going to use some other box section that I have, just because it's going to be, two gates and not one. I just want it to have plenty of strength in it, and that's the material that I have. So that's what those will be made from. Now the gudgeons, just swinging back to that because I just spied something I didn't talk to you about. The gudgeons obviously need pipe to go into. So I had a wrap round in my quote unquote wood rack, and there is this bit of pipe here which will do fine for these. I'm also debating whether to use something a bit heavier at the rear, and I may or may not do that. I have this here was the earth rod for our house, and it was down where we had to take all the garden out, and I needed to move it back closer to the house. So I tried to pull it out of the ground. This is supposed to be a couple of meters long, and as you can see, it had completely rotted off about less than a meter down into the ground. So it was a good thing I replaced it. But what that means is that I do have a good bit at this end that I could use for gudgeon pins if I wanted to, and that would fit with this size pipe. So I have options, and where we end up landing with all of that all will be revealed in the fullness of time. Right, I need to crack on. I used my brickies chisel and the dumpy hammer to remove the outside sleeve from the box section. To then remove the short piece of box section that was inside the sleeve, I used a very long cold chisel I have had that was, once upon a time, a pry bar. Back from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, I worked for what was then the New Zealand Post Office. That is where I did my trade training in the post office workshops in Newmarket in Auckland. As part of the mechanical section, where I was, we had men working on anything and everything. Posties bikes, key cutting, postmarking machines, all the way through to air conditioning systems, including sheet metal work, and large emergency power plants. There was a full machine shop, and so all sorts of things were made on lathes and milling machines and the like. It was a great place to do a trade, as you learnt such a wide range of skills. The pry bar came from overseas in a container with a shipment of telephone exchange equipment. When they were installing the equipment, they broke the head off it. I have no idea how. It was discarded, and I grabbed it and have used it a lot over the years. At that time, I was installing a large emergency power plant in the basement of the main Airedale Street Exchange in Auckland. It was a 575 kVA. It would be regarded as quite a small one by today's standards, but then that was the biggest one that we'd done. It had a V16 Detroit motor with twin turbos. It was quite the beast. I had just enough of the heavier box section left to use for the two uprights for the front gate. I'll need to find some other material to do the rear gates. Despite the fact that I stated earlier that I have a plan to make the rear gates two gates, that could still change when I get to that. I'll explain more about that later. Coming back to the story around the Airedale Street Exchange and the engine alternator, we needed to do a load test on the alternator. This got quite funny as it went along. So we rigged up a metal 45-gallon drum. That's about 200 litres in today's language. Inside the drum there were 3 paddles suspended at 120 degrees apart. They were electrically isolated from the support structure and therefore from the exterior of the drum. We filled the drum with water, connected the 3 phases to the 3 paddles, and the earth to the drum outer. As I write this, I know there will be some of you thinking, "Whoa, that sounds dangerous." Potentially it was, no pun intended, and there is no way you would be allowed to do something like this these days. Some idiot might hurt themselves. On that note, despite the fact that everyone believes in evolution, which isn't true, but you know what I mean, it seems that survival of the fittest is not something they are willing to embrace particularly, and we all have to live in cotton wool so we don't endanger ourselves. Common sense is now an oxymoron. Anyway, load testing the engine alternator. Everything was going well and the water was quickly getting warm. We were measuring the current draw, and the electrical engineer in charge decided he wanted a bit more current draw, so he threw a handful of salt into the drum. Almost immediately the engine stopped. He had created what was basically a dead short. Once we had ascertained that there was no damage done, we all chuckled, drained most of the water out of the drum, filled it up again and started again. This is the point at which I should have realised that I had taken the offcut from the saw rather than the piece I needed, which was still clamped in the saw. When I ran the tape over it, I thought to myself, that's interesting, that piece is the same length as the piece that I'm using, rather than realising that it was the piece I should have been using. I carried on with the process of measuring the sleeve 500mm and then marking it so that each bit came in 250mm from each end. That was so I had a mark to push each end to. It was only after I'd put both pieces in the sleeve and I realised overall it was too short. Head scratching. As a consequence of this, I needed to separate the two pieces. Ho hum. So did you spot the deliberate mistake? What I did was I measured it in the saw, cut it in the saw, and then grabbed the offcut instead of grabbing the piece that was supposed to go in there. Consequently, when I put it in, it was a bit short one end. It has now been removed and I will replace it with the correct one. Once I had the upper and lower rails both the same length, it was then a straightforward task to weld them together. I bent in the sides of the ends of the rails again to make them easier to weld to the uprights. Hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Next video will continue with the trailer modifications, and I'll talk a bit about welders and in particular how MIG welders work and how they're different from arc welders and TIG welders. Well, it seems that's as far as we're going today because I have run out of flux core wire for the welder. So I will need to get some more of that. I had noticed the other day that it was getting down a bit and I meant to get some when I was in town and I forgot. So that's it for today. Bye.